All right, cheers, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try to rush through it because it's kind of long, but it's some important information I've been kind of sitting on. I have a few versions of it, but this one's the shortest one, and it's to address legalization and unscheduling and to bring forward information about the endocannabinoid system so you guys can just pass this shit on. It's too valuable to sit on it. So there we go. Please bear with me. I'm not that good at making videos or reading out loud. But like I said, I can't fucking sit on this information anymore. I send it to a few people. Nobody gives a fuck. So maybe we'll try it this way. All right. Part one, the war on cannabis, crimes against humanity and systemic suppression. For thousands of years, cannabis and hemp were central to human civilization. They were not merely plants, but vital resources for medicine, nutrition, textiles, fuel, paper, construction, and countless industrial applications. At the height of its use, over 5,000 products were made from the whole plant. In some regions, farmers were legally required to grow hemp. Failure to comply could result in fines or imprisonment. Hemp and cannabis offered renewable alternatives to timber, silk, cotton, and petroleum-based materials, directly threatening emerging industrial monopolies. By the early 20th century, a powerful coalition of industrial magnates sought to consolidate control over resources and eliminate competition. Key figures included John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Mellon, DuPont, Hearst, and leaders in big tobacco. Rockefeller and Carnegie partnered in the pharmaceutical sector, leveraging their combined influence to dominate synthetic drugs and suppress natural remedies like cannabis. Rockefeller's Standard Oil viewed hemp oil and biofuels as a direct threat to fossil fuel profits, while Carnegie's foundations promoted research prioritizing synthetic compounds over botanical alternatives. DuPont saw hemp fibers as competition for synthetic textiles and plastics. Hearst, timber, and paper empires were threatened by hemp pulp, and big tobacco feared the popularity of hemp-based smoking products. Even silk and logging industries faced disruptions from hemp fibers, which were cheaper, renewable, and environmentally sustainable. This unprecedented convergence of industrial interests marked a pivotal moment in American economic and political history. The 1910 Flexner Report reshaped American medicine, legitimizing pharmaceutical solutions while discrediting botanical remedies. This effectively outlawed herbal medicine and facilitated the rise of addictive synthetic compounds such as morphine and heroin, replacing safe traditional treatments. This period laid the groundwork for replacing natural medicine with profit-driven pharmaceuticals while systematically criminalizing cannabis and hemp. A critical moment came in the 1930s with the appointment of Harry Anslinger as the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Anslinger was appointed with support from Andrew Mellon, then Secretary of the Treasury, who was deeply invested in the industrial consolidation of the area. Anslinger also solidified these elite connections by marrying Mellon's niece. Armed with this backing, Anslinger spearheaded a nationwide propaganda campaign that exploited racial prejudices, targeted Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities, and spread misinformation about cannabis. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act codified the criminalization of cannabis. Most Americans were unaware that hemp, marijuana, and cannabis were the same plant. The act imposed severe taxes and restrictive regulations, effectively ending legal hemp cultivation and closing off research into its medicinal and industrial potential. Farmers now faced fines of imprisonment for growing a plant that had once been essential to local economies, nutrition, and industry. Meanwhile, synthetic alternatives thrived, and public misinformation about cannabis dangers proliferated. The war on cannabis extended beyond legislation. Industrial and governmental collusion actively suppressed scientific research, preventing universities and laboratories from studying cannabis pharmacology and the endocannabinoid system. Hundreds of receptors in the human body, which could be mapped to develop real medicine, remained understudied due to decades of scientific suppression. Psychological warfare maintained public fear and stigma, ensuring compliance and perpetuating the dominance of profit-driven synthetic compounds. The human cost was devastating. Mass incarceration tore communities apart, particularly those already marginalized. Families were disrupted, intergenerational trauma became systemic, and neighborhoods were destabilized, economic opportunities vanished, and centuries of cultural knowledge surrounding cannabis and hemp were lost. Even today, legalization largely benefits corporate monopolies rather than the communities that suffer the most. Profit continues to outweigh public health, environmental sustainability, and social equity. Cannabis criminalization was not an isolated policy decision, but a coordinated multi-industry effort to maintain market control and suppress knowledge. Collusion between industrial barons, government officials, and law enforcement used propaganda, racialized fear campaigns, and legal frameworks to suppress information, prevent research, and eliminate competition. The plant's medical, nutritional, and industrial potential was deliberately buried. Just as history has judged the crimes of colonialism, slavery, and medical exploitation, history will judge the betrayal of cannabis prohibition. The endocannabinoid system is key to reclaiming medicine, autonomy, and public health. Mapping biomarkers and studying receptor interactions could justify legalization, descheduling, and the return of home cultivation, home grow, empowering people rather than corporations. The history of cannabis criminalization exposes patterns of systemic corruption, collusion, and crimes against humanity. Recognizing this history is not only a call to justice, but a roadmap to reform, equitable access, medical innovation, and the restoration of knowledge in communities devastated by decades of repression. Part 2, the endocannabinoid system, unlocking true medicine. The endocannabinoid system is a master regulator of human physiology, orchestrating balance across nearly every bodily system. While CB1 and CB2 receptors are the most recognized, hundreds of additional receptors exist throughout the brain, immune system, gut, and peripheral organs, all interacting with the endocannabinoids and plant-derived cannabinoids to maintain homeostasis. This system governs sleep, mood, immune response, metabolism, pain perception, inflammation, and neurological function, among other critical processes. Cannabinoids, whether naturally produced in the body, which are endocannabinoids, or introduced from external sources, exogenous cannabinoids, interact with the ECS in highly individualized ways. Genetic variations, enzyme mutations, receptor density differences, diet, and lifestyle profoundly influence ECS functioning. Disruptions can manifest as chronic conditions, including epilepsy, anxiety, depression, PTSD, autoimmune disorders, neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, chronic pain, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic syndrome, addiction vulnerability, and cardiovascular irregularities, just to name a few. The list is way longer. Lifestyle, diet, and circadian rhythms play a pivotal role in ECS balance. Nutrient deficiencies, poor sleep patterns, chronic stress, and circadian disruptions can reduce endocannabinoid production and receptor efficiency. Diets rich in essential fatty acids, antioxidants, and phytonutrients support ECS functioning, while chronic consumptions of processed foods, inflammatory fats, and sugars can impair the system. Let's not forget pharmaceuticals. Circadian alignment, synchronizing sleep and activity with natural light cycles, is essential for regulating endocannabinoid signaling, hormone production, and metabolic function. Evidence shows there are up to 140 exogenous cannabinoids to date, and hundreds of lesser-known compounds that offer powerful therapeutic potential. These compounds can restore ECS balance, mitigate enzyme dysfunction, and influence gene expression to promote health. Studies show cannabinoids can reduce seizure frequency in epilepsy, modulate immune responses, alleviate anxiety and depression, support recovery from addiction, improve gut-brain communication, and even counteract some metabolic and cardiovascular dysfunctions. Targeted ECS testing allows for mapping of receptor activity, enzyme functionality, and genetic variations, enabling personalized cannabinoid therapy with optimized safety and efficacy. Historically, access to cannabis and related compounds was systematically restricted, blocking research and suppressing knowledge for decades. Policies were driven by industrial interests, including pharmaceutical magnates, big tobacco, and agricultural monopolies who viewed hemp and cannabis as economic threats. These restrictions caused widespread untreated suffering, intergenerational trauma, and targeted oppression of marginalized communities. The consequences are ongoing, with communities continuing to face health disparities, incarceration, and systemic neglect. The ECS also represents a crucial frontier for understanding substance interactions in addiction biology. Synthetic drugs and substances designed for dependency often exploit ECS pathways, altering receptor activity and mutating genetic expression over generations. That means we're passing this shit on to our kids. Comprehensive ECS analysis can identify vulnerabilities, inform preventative strategies, and guide safer evidence-based therapeutic approaches. Furthermore, ECS testing provides insight into gut health, diet-related imbalances, circadian rhythm disruptions, and systemic inflammation. By measuring biomarkers, researchers and clinicians can fingerprint specific conditions and match therapies to individual physiology, enabling real medicine instead of a one-size intervention, meaning we could breed cannabis towards specific ailments. Understanding these interactions highlights with why legalization and unscheduling are essential. Responsible access to plant-based cannabinoids empowers home cultivation, dietary synergy, and lifestyle alignment to optimize health. In essence, the ECS is not only a biological system, but a social justice issue. Its suppression reflects historical greed and systemic corruption, while its unlocking offers a path to justice, health, equity, and personalized medicine. Knowledge of the ECS validates decades of lived experience, supports integrative healthcare, and lays the foundation for more humane, effective, and scientifically grounded approach to wellness. I know it's a little bit long. We're getting close to the end here. Bear with me. Part 3, the endocannabinoid system, substance interactions, and the consequences of prohibition. The endocannabinoid system is a fundamental regulatory network in the human body, influencing hundreds of physiological processes beyond the commonly cited CB1 and CB2 receptors. This system maintains homeostasis across neurological, immune, endocrine, and gastrointestinal systems, regulating pain, mood, appetite, inflammation, metabolic function, enzyme deficiencies, or exogenous interference. Can predispose individuals to chronic disease, neurodegenerative conditions, autoimmune dysfunction, metabolic syndromes, and mental health disorders. Exogenous cannabinoids consumed through medical or recreational cannabis interact with the ECS in highly specific ways. Their effects are influenced by receptor polymorphism, endocannabinoid enzyme mutations, and individual biochemical profiles. These interactions can be therapeutic, addressing epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, anxiety, depression, inflammatory bowel disease, chronic pain, sleep disorders, and neurodegenerative disorders. This is just a small list, or a few on the list. Yet decades of prohibition and corporate control have limited research, producing fragmented or compromised data, often influenced by conflicts of interest in the pharmaceutical and agricultural industries. Human exposure to synthetic chemicals, including pesticides, fungicides, plant growth regulators, synthetic hormones like HGH, and food additives such as sugar, emulsifiers, artificial dyes, processed foods further compounds ECS dysfunction. These substances can interfere with cannabinoid receptor activity, alter enzymatic pathways, and contribute to epigenetic mutations. Pharmaceutical compounds intentionally designed for addictive properties exacerbate these disruptions, often making underlying ECS imbalances rather than addressing root causes. As a result, long-term exposure to both environmental and synthetic chemicals has contributed to population-wide genetic, metabolic, and neurological dysfunction. Effects only recently becoming measurable through biomarkers and ECS testing. Cannabis breeding practices over the last century have prioritized high THC content, creating significant genetic bottlenecks. Feminized seeds, repeated cloning, and selection for psychotropic potency have reduced the diversity of minor cannabinoids and terpene compounds critical to the therapeutic entourage effect. It's causing issues. Like, I don't know why it's not clear enough for everybody. Many historical utilized strains rich in CBD, CBG, CBC, THCV, and several other minor cannabinoids have been lost. This narrowing of genetic diversity has direct health consequences as it limits the availability of targeted therapeutics for species or specific ECS mediated conditions. The multi-billion-dollar industry surrounding addiction, pharmaceuticals, chemical agriculture, and addictive substances have constantly suppressed independent research into the ECS. Policies designed to enforce prohibition created barriers to scientific inquiry, delayed biomarker mapping, and restricted public access to cultivars capable of restoring health. These systemic manipulations, ranging from selective breeding, chemical exposure, corporate lobbying, to regulatory capture, have had intergenerational consequences, creating cycles of chronic disease, mental health challenges, and dependency. Diet, circadian rhythms, lifestyle, and environmental exposures further modulate ECS function. Diets high in sugars, emulsifiers, and processed foods can reduce endocannabinoid receptor sensitivity. Disrupted circadian rhythms impair ECS-mediated regulation of sleep, metabolism, and hormonal balance. Chronic exposure to environmental toxic compounds, these effects highlight the urgent need for comprehensive ECS testing, biomarker identification, and individualized treatment protocols. These substance interactions are mutating our genetics. As someone trained in addictions, trauma care, youth and family counseling, community services, Indigenous studies, and recovery coaching, I have witnessed firsthand the psychological and physiological ramifications of systemic neglect and chemical exposure. Scientific evidence, when properly interpreted, reveals the ECS as a central node in human health, highlighting both the consequences of prohibition and the potential for cannabis-based interventions. Proper ECS mapping, biomarker identification, and the reintroduction of diverse cannabis cultivars could provide individualized evidence-based treatment, enabling genuine medical solutions rather than profit-driven band-aids. The ultimate goal is clear. Legalization and unscheduling of cannabis are not merely social justice imperative. They are essential public health strategies. Understanding and leveraging the ECS allows for responsible home cultivation, therapeutic use, and preventative care. Through rigorous ECS testing, public education, and evidence-based policy, it is possible to counter decades of corporate manipulation, systemic corruption, and the deliberate suppression of human health. History will judge these actions, just as it has judged colonialism, slavery, and medical exploitation. The integrity of science, medicine, and human health demands no less. Inform yourselves. Let's get together on this and push for endocannabinoid testing. Come on, guys. One voice is nothing, but together, the squeaky wheel gets greased. All right, peace out. I'm out. Love yous.